Welcome everyone, and we are so thrilled that you are with us today. This presentation is about the first biological law where you will learn the shocking truth about the cause of disease. First, our disclaimer. The information in this summit and in this presentation is for educational purposes only. And moving on, I would like to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Kathy Little. Kathy, tell us about yourself.
Welcome everyone from Canada. It's so nice to be with you today. So I obtained my Bachelor of Science degree in physical therapy at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, in Canada. And then over the years, I've worked in different parts of the country, and I've worked overseas in Zimbabwe for 2.5 years, which was fascinating. And then over the years, I've taken a lot of more courses, and I've become an advanced visceral therapist. I do craniosacral therapy, lymphatics. But it was in 2007 when I first took German New Medicine. That was a paradigm shift. And now I would say that's my toolbox, and my other tools to help me look at the body holistically as well are tools in that toolbox of German New Medicine. So over the last decade, I've had a study group here in Calgary for 10 years, and I've taught introductory and more detailed courses, but I use it every day in my practice. So now, Andy, my colleague from the US, can you tell us about your past?
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I'm Andy Locke-Mears. It's wonderful to be here. I am a co-founder of USAGNM, but going back, I have a master's degree from the University of Maine, and then I became a traditional naturopath. So I was trained in a lot of different healing modalities. I had a successful wellness center in Maine, and then in 2009, I learned German New Medicine, and it totally changed my world. It also changed how I worked with my clients. I was able to be more effective with them, and that was very wonderful to see. Over the years, I sold my wellness center and moved to North Carolina. I then developed online courses to teach German New Medicine, and so I teach now and consult with GNM with people all over the world, and I do in-person presentations as well. So it's wonderful to be here. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Kathy, can you tell us how the discovery of the first biological law and GNM all began?
Sure, Andy. Here on the screen, you can see our beloved Dr. Hammer. It's always an honor to speak about Dr. Hammer and his amazing journey to uncover the natural laws of healing. And then alongside is a picture of Dirk, his son, who back in August 18th, 1978, was accidentally but fatally shot. And within 4 months of Dirk's death, Dr. Hammer was diagnosed with a form of testicular cancer. Now, Dr. Hammer was very happily married. He loved his work. His patients loved him. And so his thinking went to wondering, wow, does this sudden tragic loss of my son have something to do with my diagnosis? Dr. Hammer was an internal medicine specialist. And so he went into the oncology wards and just started talking to cancer patients and asking them what was going on in your life before your diagnosis. So sure enough, he heard lots of emotional stories, and all the testicular cancer patients he talked to all described some kind of profound loss in their life prior to their diagnosis. So he continued on researching with this new information, and in 1981, he presented to the medical faculty of the University of Tübingen. So this would have been a postdoctorate thesis. So despite 4 successful court challenges, his findings have never been published or recognized by conventional medicine. You see, once a paper is published, it is then in the public domain, and that is what conventional medicine does not want. Andy, can you describe more of Dr. Hammer's years of research?
Absolutely, Kathy. So he began seeing correlations, like Kathy said. Next, he analyzed their brain CT scans. Every single person in his clinic had a targeted ring formation, like a bullseye, in their brain, different areas on the brain scan. He realized that everyone who had experienced the same type of distress, like profound loss, prior to their diagnosis, all had the lesion in the same place in the brain. He went one step further. He looked at their current diagnoses. It was then evident to him that everyone who had experienced the same type of distress who all had the lesion in the same area of the brain also had the same diagnosis of cancer. Thus, men who had experienced profound loss all had testicular cancer. Everyone who had experienced an ugly, indigestible event all had colon cancer. Women who had experienced a stressful separation from someone all had ductal breast cancer. Those who had experienced some sort of attack had melanoma, and so on. This was true in 100% of his patients. There were no exceptions, which is amazing. So Dr. Hammer established that every disease, from the common cold to cancer, to food intolerances, to warts, to a heart attack, they're initiated by an unexpected conflict shock. This was a very unique and a very new approach to understanding disease. Dr. Hammer was the first person to examine the brain as the origin of disease. So Kathy, can you now tell us what is the first biological law?
Thanks, Andy. So here on the screen it is, and I'll read it with you. Every disease and symptom, a significant biological special program, originates from an unexpected, highly acute, and isolating conflict shock, or DHS, that occurs simultaneously in the psyche, the brain, and on the corresponding organ. So what does that mean? Well, in honor of his son, Dirk, who died, he called these conflict shocks, or this unanticipated stressful event, a DHS, standing for Dirk-Hammer syndrome. And we sometimes just call it a conflict shock. But a DHS is a very personal incident. It's conditioned by our past experiences, our vulnerabilities, and our individual perceptions of the world, which is largely based on our beliefs and values. I'll give you 3 quick examples. Say you're driving down the street and bang, there's a really horrible accident in front of you. Sudden, unexpected. You're about to go out on a party weekend and bang, your boss comes in and loads you up for stuff that needs to be done by Monday. Sudden, unexpected. You're at home and your spouse comes home unexpectedly and you're arguing. Sudden, unanticipated. We see that the conflict shock is an emotionally distressing event that you weren't anticipating. And since you didn't expect it, your body, your nervous system can't prepare for the shock. And thus, it's the psyche interprets this suddenness as a threat. The significant biological special program is activated in these times of sudden unexpected shock, and it's there to help us survive. As we said, Dr. Hammer has done decades of research. But early on, he really discovered that this psyche, the brain, and the body really constitutes a single biological unit. So let's unpack this, Andy. Can you talk about the psyche?
Absolutely. It's really important to understand what the psyche is to Dr. Hammer. Dr. Hammer's definition of the psyche is that it is the part of your body that perceives and interprets the world around you, and thus it's the part that recognizes danger. The psyche is biological, and it includes the senses, which detect sensory data from our environment, what we say, touch, hear, smell, and see, and it transmits it via your nervous system to your brain. These all act together simultaneously. Keep in mind, this is not Freud's definition of the psyche. Dr. Hammer was a physician, so his definition is biological, not mental. And again, it's that part of your body that recognizes danger in your environment. So Kathy, why would our body turn these programs on? What's the purpose?
Thanks, Andy. So with every disease, which is part of a significant biological special program, they're created to assist us, not just us humans, but also our fellow animals, in resolving the biological conflict. So as Andy said, our psyche's reaction is instantaneous. It's not like we think about how we should respond or that we feel how we should respond. It's not psychological. It is a biological reaction. And this is a big distinction from how conventional medicine and alternative medicine think about this. Andy, can you further distinguish the difference between general stress and a significant biological special program?
Yes, that's a great question. General stress and conflict activity look a lot alike. Conflict activity is what you're feeling the moment that you have a conflict shock. However, stress doesn't shock the nervous system the way an unexpected event does. The stress may build and build, like the guy on the left here. You feel the stress building and eventually you blow. It's not necessarily unexpected as it builds and builds. It sure isn't pleasant though. But the important thing to realize is that every time you're upset or stressed, it doesn't mean you have activated a biological program. It could simply be that you're stressed. Know that being stressed depletes our bodies of energy, which doesn't help our overall health. So that's important to remember. Let's look more at what Dr. Hummer discovered, and he looked at CT scans. Kathy, can you describe what he saw?
This is really the amazing work of Dr. Hummer, learning how to read CT scans. And it so much adds to the scientific validity of his discovery. So in reading a CT, it shows you the individual person's history of disease. It's amazing. So you can see on the slides here, these are two different slides of different parts of the brain, but you can see these orange circles that are indicating the imprint in the brain following a shock. But you can see on both of these that there's more than one imprint. Andy, what would that mean or indicate if you see more than one imprint on a brain scan?
And this is what's absolutely fascinating. It means, Kathy, that these people have experienced more than one conflict shock and have turned on more than one biological program. They're running more than one at the same time. It's what allopathic medicine will call metastases. Dr. Hummer discovered that secondary or additional cancers are not caused by spreading cancer cells. Instead, additional or secondary programs often begin with the diagnosis or the prognosis shock. Let's look at how this happens. Let's look at the common ones. According to the National Cancer Institute, the most common metastatic cancers are those that have spread to the lungs, bones, and liver. When we understand GNM, we know exactly why these are the top 3 so-called metastatic cancers. The first one is the lung program. This is biologically linked to a death-fright conflict. It's most often the result of a diagnosis or prognosis shock perceived as a death sentence. That means we're sitting in the doctor's office and we hear the doctor tell us that we have cancer and we're shocked, and the first thing we think of is that, oh, I'm going to die. The death-fright conflict starts the program which assists us right there in the doctor's office in processing more oxygen, which will help us better survive. The next one is the bone program. This is biologically linked to feeling less than. It's a self-devaluation. We may feel devastated. We've always thought we were really healthy, and now that belief is shattered. The last one is the liver program. This is biologically linked to a starvation conflict. It usually has to do with food or money that we use to buy food. If you're really sick, how can you still provide for your family? Or how will you pay for hospital bills and food? The important thing to remember here is that there's nothing random in the body. Everything has a purpose. This is a brief look at secondary cancers, which is certainly a lot to think about. Let's move on though. Kathy, let's talk about a biological program that is important for all of our attendees to be familiar with.
Thanks, Andy. So here in this slide, and I just want to say thank you, Andy, for making all these lovely slides. You can see a picture of the kidney, and you see the different colors, which are indicating different parts of the kidney. And each part has its own special function and therefore its own program. And so again, this is another big distinction between conventional and alternative medicine and how they see an organ. So here we're looking at the yellow part, the kidney collecting tubule, or KCT for short. And its program is what we call the fish out of water program. So it's a program where in the active phase, you get water retention. And the knowledge of this program is really critical in a lot of aspects of our health. This program, the KCT, can run as a solo program where we can get water retention, but it also can be running when another organ is in a healing phase. And this is something we call the syndrome. And it's really important because sometimes it can be a matter of life and death. So what's happening when you have the active phase of the kidney collecting tubule, you have this water retention. But when you're healing in another organ, another part of the body, that water retention will go to that healing organ and make healing worse because you have more swelling in that phase. So it can be quite dangerous. And then perchance, if you're in the hospital and they give you cortisone, which is a big anti-inflammatory drug, because they're seeing this water retention, so they want to get rid of the fluid, but they don't understand that this program of the KCT is running. They give you cortisone, that speeds up the water retention, and someone becomes a Michelin man, which is usually a fatal condition. That's brief, but it's really important. This syndrome and the KCT program could save countless lives, whether you're in or out of the hospital. Andy, can we move on to another aspect of the first biological law? That's very important to know.
Yes, for sure. Another aspect of the first biological law that's important to know is whether you are right or left dominant. Every being has a dominant side, humans and animals alike, and it's not necessarily the hand that you write with. The side of you that is dominant determines whether the hammer focus, the imprint in the brain, impacts on the right or the left side of the brain, and this determines whether a symptom manifests on the right or the left side of the body. Dr. Hammer realized there was more meaning to handedness, and he called this the principle of laterality. And it reads, a right-handed person responds to a conflict with his or her mother or child with the left side of the body, and to a conflict with a partner or anyone else in the world with the right side. And this is reversed for left-handed people. Your laterality is important to know, so you'll start to understand the language of your body. If you are right dominant and your left shoulder hurts, it means you've had a conflict shock with your mother or your kids. If your right shoulder hurts, it means the conflict is related to your partner or your boss or anyone else in the world that's not your mother or child. There are exceptions to this, of course, and exceptions depend on how your psyche perceives the relationship you have with the other person. For example, evidently, all of the issues I have with anyone end up on my mother-child side because my psyche sees that I process everyone as if they're my child and I have to take care of them. That's just me. If you're an entrepreneur and your business is your baby, that also can impact on your mother-child side. So there's just a few examples of the exceptions. So far, we've given you some basics of the first biological law. Let's start to wrap this up now by talking about therapy. Kathy, what is GNM therapy?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, that's an often asked question. For me, people don't always really appreciate the depth of knowledge and understanding the teachings of GNM and how it's the big picture and really shows us how all of the disease process happens. Because it allows me to know what conflict is related to my significant biological special program. It tells me what phase your program is in and what symptoms to expect as it progresses, and therefore how to manage your symptoms. So that's very inclusive. The knowledge of this is so extensive and it's so precise, like your handedness and all that, that it gives you so much support in dealing with your conflict and our life's issues, that it can allow us to go through it in a less fear state, less panic, and prevent us from going into what often happens when we go into a chronic disease process. And of course, it can avoid those more serious programs. The knowledge is really so all-inclusive in helping us through the whole process. But again, we really have to remember that this is a biologically based natural science. So Andy, how does knowing GNM help you with your clients?
That's a great question, Kathy, and especially for the practitioners who are watching this. Please know that most of us who work with GNM don't use CT scans because we're not trained in them, and for the most part, they aren't necessary. We understand what's occurring just by knowing the symptoms of our clients. So I always learn what are the symptoms, and that informs me what program is running. Once I know that, we start to look at the conflict shock. What was that all about? So they understand how this all began. Then we look at how will this program progress naturally and how does it resolve naturally. This is really important information that gets people out of fear. And by getting out of fear, it can downgrade or reduce the KCT program that Kathy just told us about. Then I work with my clients to support their psyches and also their bodies to help finish their programs once and for all. So Kathy, how does knowing GNM help you with your clients?
Well, first of all, ditto to what you've said, Andy. And then I would just add, we tend to think about dancing with our clients because we really never know what's in another person's psyche. So we really do need to treat each person differently. And over the years, I've come to realize, for me, it's important if I'm doing a pure GNM consult, I want that person to have watched the video or had done some basic reading on German New Medicine so that they, are open to the conversation, because otherwise it can be actually detrimental. For some clients, I just may introduce the very basic thinking or concept that you're not in a disease state, you're in a healing state, which is a huge paradigm shift and can be greatly helpful to any person. And then I may have some clients that are further advanced or more open, or they may be having some dangerous, potentially symptomology that I go, into depth, right away and sooner. For some clients, I just introduce the concept that most symptoms are part of a healing process and not a pathology, like conventional or alternative medicine tends to think. There's nothing wrong. So that can really, really bring down, the fear and anxiety. And it's a huge paradigm shift for them in thinking about a disease process versus a natural healing. Now, for other clients who know more or have a more open mind or may have more serious or dangerous symptoms, I go much deeper into the work right away. So it really is a client by client operation. And really, based on the GNM assessment, I know how and where to go with them.
Okay. All right, awesome, Kathy. Well, that is a wrap for the first biological law. We hope you've enjoyed this, and we hope you enjoyed the rest of the summit as well. This is our contact information. We want to thank you very much for being here, and feel free to get in touch with us at any point. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Andy. Goodbye to everyone. Thanks for being here. Just closing remarks, be gentle with yourselves. It takes time to digest this information. And I wish you all a unique, individual, and wonderful journey. Bye.
Ditto that. Thank you, Kathy.